Who were you before you lost your wild self?
That's what we're helping you explore on the Tend Her Wild podcast.
Through questions and tools around how best to listen to your inner voice,
rewild ourselves, and live the most authentic life where we thrive instead of survive.
I'm Betsy.
And I'm Kate.
And we're so glad you've joined us for this episode. Hello, Tend Her Wild podcast listeners. Thanks for joining us today. We're going to talk about our nervous systems and how we're all a little dysregulated these days and what we can do about it.
A little or a lot.
A little or a lot. Yeah.
But definitely dysregulated.
Yeah. And Kate and I were talking about how, clearly for all of us who are living in a modern culture, stress is just, it's here to stay, and stress isn't all bad. Of course, there are benefits to stress called You Stress, actually. But unfortunately, it is wreaking havoc with most of us because the levels are so high. And unlike our forefathers who got chased by a tiger and then they got to recover in their cave, you know, we're sort of just constantly being barraged by things that have the capacity to kind of amp us up.
Yeah. And on top of just the pace of our culture is also, I think, layered onto that now is this uncertainty that we are up against day in and day out. And I remember I was thinking back to the pandemic. Do you remember those uncertainty times? And maybe in some ways it's prepared us for now, but the uncertainty does seem like another constant that we now have to create tools around and kind of accept that is just the new reality, is a lot of uncertainty. But I think acknowledging it is always the first step, recognizing that that's...
Yeah, and we thought we'd talk about some tools today that you were using and that can be really helpful. In 2022, which is not that long ago, 3 years ago, so this would have been post-pandemic, American Psychological Association came out with a statistic that a third of American adults report that stress is completely overwhelming on most days. So that's 1 out of 3 of us feel completely overwhelmed. And that was 3 years ago. And I think we've added on some extra potential stressors in this last year. And so I agree that I think most of us are sort of on, I don't know, sometimes it feels a little like survival mode, right?
Yeah.
Just like
hypervigilance,
getting through the days. Do you feel that way?
I do. And I also think a lot when I think about women, particularly how we are taking on a lot of the mental, emotional load at work and at home. And so when, a third of people are feeling overwhelmed by stress, we tend to be the ones that are holding space for that at work. Yep. And then coming home and doing the same for our children and, young adults that are also struggling. And so I think for women, it's always like whatever's happening in the culture, women tend to at least
sort of absorb it a
Yeah.
little bit more. I would definitely say that. Yeah. Yeah. And we were talking about before we started, since we're always referring back to the archetype of the wild woman. And the archetype of the wild woman is very engaged with the natural rhythms of life, meaning that, sort of a wild woman would be someone who's listening to her own rhythms, and she's resting when she needs to rest, and she's taking time off, and when she's menstruating, she's doing less, or she's doing intuitive practices, right? So that's sort of what I think the wild woman has taught me, that archetype. And yet sometimes I think it's so hard to do it in our highly toxic culture, which is a very grind culture.
Hustle culture.
Hustle. It's always go, go, go.
Yeah. It does not take into account the rhythms of our cycle.
No. We have to work really hard to do it.
We have to be intentional and prioritize taking care of ourselves in a way that often I think it's hard for us to do and to verbalize and to actually take those steps because there can be judgment around it, or we feel like we're not meeting everyone else's expectations. But I think I've learned too, if I'm not at my best, like it's not good for anyone.
Right.
And so, but it
As
is,
women, you are the what do they say? The middle of the hub of the wheel,
mhm.
of the family wheel, right? So if things aren't going
Yeah,
well for you, it really is bleeding
works
into
out.
everyone else's life as well.
Yeah.
Well, I truly believe that unfortunately, most of us are quite dysregulated. And it's not through any fault of our own or necessarily something we're doing wrong. But when you're living in a very toxic culture with a lot of things going on, a lot of things coming at us, this kind of constant bombardment of, the news, just reading the news is
Yeah.
going to dysregulate us. And it's there all the time for us to consume. So I think we have to be very conscious about how we're consuming it. But I do think most people are living quite dysregulated lives in terms of their nervous system. So let's talk about what that actually looks like. Do you think you're pretty dysregulated, or should we go through the steps first and then you can be like, check,
Yeah.
check?
Let's go through the steps.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So clearly, what are the things that dysregulate us? Stress is the number one
Mhm.
thing. Addiction is a big thing. But also, there's a lot of research on early childhood traumas have a deep capacity to carry through our life and keep us in a dysregulated state. And hence, one of our questions that we ask all of our people when they come on, tell us about the first 10 years. It really is essential for us to understand, like, was I raised in a vigilant family or a family that was holding a lot of stress and dysregulation? If you were, most likely that's then become your normal.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's interesting when you get to be the age I am, thinking about different parts of my life, and now I can look at chapters of how dysregulated I
Yeah.
lived. Certainly as a young mom, I think I was often felt the stress of motherhood. And I think when you are a new mother too, I think some of those early 10 years really comes flooding back too on how you are going to parent, how you were parented. And I think there's probably some of that stuff came up for me during that
Yeah.
time too. And then
Yeah.
other chapters, you know, I always used to, I think this is my big aha when we started talking about this, is I often associated the stress with what I was doing at the time, right? What the job was, what the people's expectations were of me. Really, it was my response and
Mm,
how I was
great
showing
point.
up, and the pressure I put on myself.
Yeah.
And so I think I'm a total work in progress, but I'm just so much more aware of it now. And
Yeah.
so I do feel like I navigate stress differently. It's not, I don't go without it, but I navigate it differently. And I've taken away I've taken away things that used to be a crutch for me.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think that has helped me get better rest and do the
Yeah.
tools that I know help me. So,
And I would say you bring up a really good point in that when we start to investigate for ourselves how dysregulated I is that we need to take into consideration, yes, our history, yes, the current stress we're under, but also our response to all of it. So it's both and.
yeah,
So yes, it is, how am I dealing with this? How am I thinking about this? Do I have the resources in place that I need? And there are very real situations in life, especially for people with brown skin or in, populations that, don't have the same amount of resources, that in fact is the directly related
right.
to their dysregulation. So it's both a what am I doing to manage this, and there might be very real situations
Absolutely.
that people don't have control over that are totally dysregulating them.
Yeah. And our culture, it's a perfect example right now of our culture,
Right.
and how
Right.
people are being hyper vigilant about so much,
Yeah.
because our culture is almost demanding that of us in some ways to feel safe, or to feel like we're trying to be safe and being hyper vigilant. And yeah, I totally acknowledge that. And I
Yeah.
think that's
Yeah.
important.
All right. So let's talk about a couple signs that might point to the fact that you could be dysregulated. And for all of us, we're going to be like, yep, check, check,
Mhm.
check. Maybe not all of them, but this will give you a little bit of sense of like, is my nervous system dysregulated? One of the first things I always ask people is, do you feel wired, but also tired?
Mhm.
So that you can't like quite sit still. Your mind is bouncing around all over the place, but you are exhausted. I think that's a real major sign of nervous system dysregulation.
Yep. 100%.
How's your digestion? Can you eat and eliminate properly, or are you having lots of diarrhea? Are you having lots of constipation?
Mhm.
The other
way.
direction, so digestion is often very regulate or very tied to it because it's part of the vagal nerve system. What about your menstruation? If you haven't gone through menopause yet, how's your cycle? Is it regular? Is it aligned with the moon? Often when we're
Mhm.
quite regulated,
Let's
we
see.
are getting our period. If we're not on, a hormonal birth control, it's often regulate. It's often aligned with the moon
Mhm.
cycles. Do you get aroused? Do you get sexually turned on, or does that feel all shut off and shut
Mhm.
down? If we're in a high stress place, that is often one of the first things to go.
Yep.
Can you close your eyes and take a nice rest? Can you do that? Can you
Yes,
lay on a couch?
I can take Savasana.
You can do really well with that.
I do drop into that pretty
Okay.
easily. And
Okay.
a nap. I
You
could
can
do a
nap.
nap.
Yeah, I'm
Yeah.
not a napper, so I don't do well with
Yeah.
that. What about like joy? Can you laugh hard? Um, and can you cry when things are sad? Are
Yeah.
you feeling your feelings? Are you sort of numbed out and distant? What about you?
Oh, I can feel my feelings for sure. And I feel other people's feelings too, as you know.
That's
Uh,
another episode,
that's a
but
different one. But yeah, I do. I remember my kids saying to me, it was probably last summer, we were somewhere and something happened. I can't even remember what it was, doesn't matter. But I was laughing so hard. And I remember my kids, like, I realized at one point they were laughing at me laughing
so hard.
so hard. And my
Such
daughter
a good
said to
feeling.
me, she's like, Mom, I love to, I don't hear that, basically like,
Mm.
don't hear that enough. And I internalized that a little bit like, okay, what do I not laugh that loud with them or
Or is it been more recently that you've been able to
yeah,
laugh hard like that, whereas a previous chapter in your life where you were more dysregulated,
I think
you
so.
just couldn't access that?
Yeah.
I can think of in my 20s when for sure I was dysregulated going through graduate school and all the ins and outs of that, that I just remember I didn't cry for years. Like I just couldn't cry.
Yeah.
Just couldn't, like even sad movies or people in my life, grandparents dying. And it was just so cut off from any emotional
Mhm.
feelings. I mean, that's a huge, huge sort of sign that we might be in a dysregulated
Yeah.
state.
Oh, my highest stress period was also law school. And for those 3 years, there wasn't room for
Yeah.
anything. I couldn't access that part of me
Yeah.
because I was surviving.
Exactly.
So,
Exactly. So again, the survival mode. So we're not going to go into all the ins and outs of like nervous system 101. By the way, I do have a Wisdom Wednesday on this. So if everyone wants to geek out and go into all the polyvagal theory and all of that, you can check out, I think it's called Come Home to Your Body, Creating a Resilient Nervous System. And we'll put a link in the show notes. But I think it's useful for us to at least describe that there are a couple different nervous system states
mhm.
and that you don't actually get to choose which nervous system state you go
No,
into.
like many things, we are born.
We are,
It-
and we can't think our way through like,
right.
I am going to think my way back into rest and digest. Like it's not a it's an autonomic thing. And so we like to think our big brains can take
Yeah.
over and
Tell us to just
yeah,
relax.
change how we respond to a situation. And instead, unfortunately, it's just
Can't
sort
do
of
it.
wired in. No. But of course, we all know there's fight or flight.
Mhm.
There's also freeze, which is something that is pretty new on the scene. New, I mean, in the last 10 to 20 years, people are understanding. And freeze looks like spaciness, can actually sometimes look like tiredness, can
Mhm.
feel like coldness. It can feel just like a little detached from your feelings and your body. You're just, it can look like depression too, in
Yeah.
fact. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then there's also something called fawn, which is when we really work to make people happy around us. It's
Mhm.
a safety mechanism, right? Like if I'm just really overly nice to everyone, that
Right.
somehow keeps me protected.
Yep. That'll keep me safe as long as everyone else is
Right,
okay. I'm
right.
okay.
So these are, and then of course there's the rest digest, which is when our nervous system is in regulation. But what the research is saying is that we can get sort of stuck. Or that we have a
Got it.
tendency towards one of these nervous system responses. Not that we won't go through all of them, and we will, and it's normal, by the way. Going into fight, flight, freeze, fawn, these are normal responses. They're going to happen. The problematic thing is when we sort of get stuck
Right.
in one of these, which is that dysregulated state. And then that becomes sort of our
Our
normal,
default
our
state. And
default.
then we're walking around really on a daily basis
Yeah.
in fight, freeze,
Fight,
fawn.
flight, freeze, or fawn. Exactly.
So what do you think your default
Yeah.
state?
Well, okay. So my default state is freeze. And I have learned that over just all my years of therapy. And I've actually done a lot of training in somatic based therapies and did this really amazing training last summer where I could watch in the form of this therapy that I was learning, I could watch myself go into freeze. And so I think that is born out of a childhood trauma
Mhm.
that, again, it's sort of just how my nervous system tends to respond, which is when I'm overwhelmed, I'll get really cold. And it's funny, I've been cold my whole life. And I thought that it was just a genetic thing. And
Mhm.
now I'm realizing, oh, this may be more of a nervous system thing.
Yeah.
And so for me, it also can look like spaciness. It can look like just a little bit of detachment. It can look for me like confusion. Like I just don't know what to do. I don't know what to do. And I'll get in like a loop of getting stuck in terms of like decision making. And so I'm pretty aware that that's my nervous system tendency. And it is changing in these last couple of years, just based on a lot of the tools and my awareness of it now. Because it's not like we think of freeze, we think of an animal that's being
Right.
traumatized and like they can't move. When it becomes a habitual response, it doesn't look like I'm frozen. Like, we get really good at sort of hiding these nervous system responses
Yeah.
or sort of they become so much a part of our life. We're not consciously hiding it, but we know how to work with it.
Right.
So for me, I think it shows up more as that confusion and that inability to like make a decision and sort of feeling a little bit spacey and out of my body.
Yeah.
Yeah. What about for you?
Cool.
What do you think your default response
I
is?
think my default response is fight
Yeah.
for sure. I'd
And
like
what does that look like for you?
it I probably tend toward anger if if I feel like I'm in a stress situation and I need to respond. Um, I think I am a doer, so I often will take action,
Yeah.
kind of the opposite of you,
Yeah.
where I'm like, and I'm thinking about we've had a lot of medical stuff in our family in the last 6 months and kind of having to take the lead
Hmm.
when stuff comes up. And I feel like I've, been with my family and I've actually had a front row seat at everyone's response to like a situation
Yeah.
that's high stress
Yeah.
and reflecting back on my own. And I tend to be the one that steps up and takes action.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I don't sit back.
Yeah.
But I wonder sometimes if I do that because I don't see anyone else doing that too. Like it's also as the oldest daughter,
Yeah.
firstborn, blame my legal training for everything that I don't like about myself. But also just, yeah, and I'm a Sagittarius, I'm fire.
Yeah.
And so all those things I feel like have been my patterns and are probably part of my personality. And I feel like I need to take charge. So some of that is conditioning, and I think some of that is certainly how I'm probably wired.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
so yeah, I think those are the things like my pace, I've really worked on this. My pace for most of my life was fast, fast, do, go.
Mm-hmm.
And when I think I told you this, when I left my job in a couple of years ago and I took a whole month off, my nervous system, I watched over the weeks it start to regulate again. And it was so uncomfortable.
Mm. Yeah.
Because I was like, what's happening to me? Like
Tell us what you were noticing.
I was so tired. I like once I stopped moving, I was so tired.
Yeah.
So I remember sleeping a ton, and it was the middle of winter and it was dark and I just like hibernated.
Yeah.
And I kept thinking, okay, another good night's sleep, I'm going to feel better. And it took several weeks
Yeah.
of that. And then I had to kind of readjust myself because I was so used to doing and being hyper vigilant.
Yeah.
And suddenly no one was asking or watching or needing. And so it was probably the first time in my adult life that I could just be.
Mm.
I still had one kid at home, but he was in high school. Like I just all of a sudden
Yeah.
wasn't needed in my own mind the
Yeah.
same way. And that left myself with me, left me with me
Yeah.
to kind of sort through that and getting more comfortable with being more regulated.
Yeah. That's
So,
true that I think people don't, if you've tended toward one thing your whole life, that is normal, even if it's a
yeah.
dysregulated state. And all the adrenaline that comes with stress, we literally can get addicted to
Mm-hmm.
that, which is why sometimes we keep drinking more coffee and we keep doing all the
Yes.
things to keep us in that elevated state because that's what we know, even though that state is going to push us towards physical health challenges and mental health
Right.
challenges, but we're so used to the adrenaline of all of it.
I read recently that the regulated nervous system is the new wealth.
Oh, it's good.
Because if without that, we are all pushing to a place that will never, there's only so much energy. There's only so much you can
Yeah.
do.
The body and the mind will break down
Yeah.
eventually if you stay in a dysregulated state.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So sometimes I call it burn on instead of burn out. You just burn on and on and
Yeah.
on. It never really
Yeah.
stops.
Yeah.
So when I, had this pause in my career and I actually came down off of that, I really did watch myself re-regulate and I saw the length of time it took and I felt it everywhere in my body.
Yeah.
And now I feel like I'm much more conscious of it. It doesn't mean
Yeah.
I don't ramp back up.
Yeah.
I think I did today
Yeah.
earlier.
Yeah.
But now I don't stay in that state.
Yeah.
As much.
Yeah.
Just becoming aware of it.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. So I talked about freeze. You talked about fight. Let's talk just about for those people out here who are more of a flight person. A flight person, if this is your tendency, it can look like avoidance. It can look like running from things, not dealing with things, procrastination. I also think flight can manifest as a lot of worry. It's a lot of like just spinning
ruminate.
worry, like almost like think about flight running, right? But like I'm constantly in my mind, almost running from the problem or sort of
Right.
scanning through it all the time. That's what flight can look like. And then I think fawn, which is a little more subtle, is just that constant need for making sure everyone's all right and that people pleasing and that
Yeah.
bending over backwards for people just to keeping your environment safe all the time. But it's through a form of control, right? Like I'm not showing up fully authentic. I'm showing up to make sure I feel safe by being
Ensuring
overly
is okay.
accommodating and overly pleasing. So these can sometimes be our default response. And so part of this is just education. It's been very educational for me to kind of understand my default response a little bit more. I will put plug another resource here. In our recent Tend Her on Hope, we talked more about the nervous system in class 2, and this is a free course. Anyone can access it. And then we had Fanny Hungerford on, and she did a whole mapping of your nervous system and sort of led us through an exercise to get a little bit more clear on what our default response might be. And so those of you who might be listening to this that want to go a little deeper, we'll put that link as well to help people kind of map out their nervous system.
Yeah.
Today's episode is brought to you by Dr. Yoga Mama, which is all the many offerings I have blending psychological science with the ancient wisdom of yoga and mindfulness. Join me for a yoga class, a meditation weekend, an online course, Wisdom Wednesday, which is the first Wednesday of every month, or maybe even an international retreat like Greece in the fall of 2025. By providing spaces and experiences for people to look inward, it is my great honor to watch people become the change they wish to see in the world.
This podcast is being sponsored by Kate Moreland Coaching. As a transformational coach and an advocate for authenticity and well-being, I work to support individuals and organizations navigating challenging times. Whether you are an individual, a leader, or an organization, your creative power lies in your authenticity. Doing the work to understand your strengths and acknowledge the patterns and rocks that are in your way is the path to well-being. Whether it's your career or your relationship with yourself or others, transformational change begins within. To learn more, reach out to me at katemorelandcoaching.com.
So let's talk about what we do to regulate. And I'm going to turn off my phone that keeps beeping. That's getting my nervous system dysregulated.
Yeah, speaking of, like the phones for us are probably something that, I mean, when you think about how we respond to that, right? And the immediacy and the, I need something now. That is not helping people.
Totally. All right. So what are the things, I love that idea that you were able to take this month and sort of watch your nervous system come back into regulation, although I think most of us probably won't get to do that in a lifetime, but amazing that you got to watch it happen. But what are some of the things that you think on a regular basis are helping you stay in a more regulated space, even in the midst of the craziness of our culture and politics and everything that's sort of going on in the world out there?
Two big things that come to mind are I'm much more conscious of my breath now. My anxiety breath, if it's high in my chest. And so I do regularly slow my breath when I feel my actual temperature rise.
Yeah.
Which is
if you're fight. Yeah, that is.
And so being able to breathe and just, I have a couple different breaths that I do that'll just immediately I have some relief, I would say, from that. Yeah. And then the other one is nature for me, which is constantly, I almost feel like I know when I haven't been in it. Like there's a part of me that's like, get out. Like I can feel my body wanting to be outside. And so those two things for me are like I don't want to call them quick fixes because they're not, but they shift me. Yeah. And can do it in a pretty quick way. Yeah. And those are things I can do. Luckily, I mean, I work from home so that being out, I can step outside. Yeah. And I think back when I worked, I look back and I'm like, there were times when I would do walking meetings and do things where I could get outside. Yeah. So I think you can find ways to do that. But nature for me is like a balm for so many things. Yeah.
It's a great reset. I think that's one of our easiest resets is to put ourselves in nature for a period of time.
Yeah. How about you?
Well, definitely my meditation practice is at the foundation of everything I do in terms of how I live my life and how I self-regulate. So I know that that's had a huge effect on me. But I would say for me, since I will go towards freeze, which is a little bit of disconnection from my body, it's a constant checking in. Am I back in my body? Can I feel my feet? Can I feel my pelvis? Even rubbing your arms, rubbing your body, tapping. I tap my heart. I put my hand on my heart all the time. I really like the technique of rocking. So rocking forward and back or side to side. I do a lot of rocking. That tends to land me in my body. Those are all things. And I also humming, singing, talking, anything to stimulate again, because the vagus nerve, it's the 10th cranial nerve, which is the nerve that gets innervated when we go into fight flight, when we have a stressor. Right. It,
connects to
everything. And it really, there's a lot of connections in the throat. And so that's why humming, singing, talking, these are all such good sort of calming techniques. So I do. I find myself humming. I luckily have kids who sing in the car all the time. So I'm singing Taylor
Yeah.
Swift and Broadway all the time in my car. And that really does help. And then the other thing I do on a regular thing is I let my all of my energy move back. So, and this would
Mm.
be good for a fight and flight person as well. So often when that stress response comes, we're sort of like in our front body,
We
like
lean in.
leaning in, taking action, like solving. And so there's something about like, okay, I'm just gonna like see if I can get all of my awareness in my back. Like I'm gonna
Mm.
lean back. I'm gonna feel my eyes come back into their sockets. I'm gonna like connect into the back of my brain stem, like
Ooh, I like
lengthen
it.
my neck and have my chin draw back a little bit. Like all of that moving into the back plane of my body is really like super settling for me and helps me pretty quickly downshift my nervous system.
So it's like that softening your front and
Yeah, like
mm,
instead of leaning, because I find I'm always leaning forward, like leaning forward when I drive, leaning forward when I sit, and so it's just that reminder of like, oh, Betsy, lean back, and I add like a visualization too, and this just comes from my own, I would say, worldview. But the idea that back behind me, there's support, like I'm leaning
um,
back into the support of the universe or my guidance system. It's like, oh, they have your back. It's like the idea that I'm not alone. I've
yep.
got support. That really helps me.
And it's, yeah, I have this, as I watch you sit here and do it,
Yeah, I know. I'm doing it right
we're
now.
like
I
rocking back
can't
and
not
forth.
do it.
But it's almost a letting go. Like you feel your nervous system and you're leaning into it and just being able to soften and like
Yeah.
release and let
Yeah.
go and know that,
Yeah.
yeah, the universe has your back.
Yeah.
You're okay.
Yeah.
I love that. I'm going to try that,
It's so
especially in my car. I feel like cars, you can do a lot of things in your car.
Yeah, you can breathe in your car, you can rock in your car,
Yeah.
you can tap in your car, you can lean back. Yeah, it is actually really,
Sing.
you can sing, you can hum, you can all of that. The other little one that I don't do that much because I don't tend towards that fight, sort of fiery, angry, but cold water on your face or
Hmm.
holding ice and like rubbing it is so good. In fact, people who go into really dysregulated states, that's one, it's a clinical thing we often will teach people is like
Cold.
cold water on their face. Like it, because it's like it snaps you out of
Hmm.
that state. And so if people find themselves really dysregulated, you could play around with using ice to really
Yeah.
kind of slow some things down.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
probably why all these cold
Plungers.
plunges are because I think it is actually really helping people's nervous system is
Right.
the cold plunging. So, yeah,
We have one of those tubs.
you do have a cold plunge, don't
Yeah,
you?
we do. My husband does it. I've done it several times. He does it more regularly.
Yeah,
I think it really helps. It does help. I mean, he will say it
yeah,
really helps. Do you remember? And we've done it together in the cold ocean.
yeah, yes,
And so there's a lot of cultures that actually, women especially, we were in Ireland, women would meet at the
yeah,
cold ocean and plunge.
yeah. And it's interesting because a lot of people will talk about the benefits for them of cold plunging and how much they love it, how good they feel. I actually don't
We
typically
love
feel
it.
that great afterwards.
Yeah.
And again, I think it's because my if my tendency is freeze, I don't need
Right.
to put
You're already
myself in
cold.
cold water,
You're
right?
already
I'm already
cold.
freezing all the time. So this is where I think again it
Yeah.
helps to really get a a read on your own nervous system and how it's sort of wired. Oh, we should share this last piece and then we'll put some information in. There is also this amazing research about the kind of tissue that you're born with
Oh, yeah.
and how it impacts your nervous system. And you and I, again, are
We
opposite,
are.
which I think is probably why we do well in this podcast too, because we share different perspectives. So there's this research on your fascia, which is essentially your connective tissue. It's that web of tissue that's right under the surface of the skin. And so the nerves for our nervous system run through that. And so clearly we're talking about nervous system dysregulation. Of
Right.
course, I think there's so much we don't know about our nervous systems and how we respond to stress. But There's two different types of fascia. One is collagenous, which is when your tissue is very dense. Mm-hmm. And so you default to fight response. And you were saying, that's me. And the other things, you can read some of these that also are connected to collagenous tissue.
Yeah, the liking hot yoga, so liking to stretch. Mm-hmm. And I do. I love being able to stretch out. Tendency toward bursts of anger, which I talked about. Fast pace, quick to rise in the morning. This one is a little iffy for me. I'm not so quick to rise. Being a doer, digestion's regular, hard to let down your guard and relax. And that has been the work of my last several years, right? Yeah. Is letting down my guard. Yeah. So that's not, it's the, like we talked about, naturally, it's to keep my guard up, right? Yeah. So being able to let go is, I don't see it as fighting that pattern as much as, I guess, finding ways to soften the patterns that are naturally there. I think
this also shows you that, I do have collagenous tissue, which means that I
tense.
Yeah. And these type of people just tend to be more naturally stiff. Mm-hmm. Right. And so knowing like, that is impacting how my typical nervous system response can be really helpful. And then the other style of tissue is more of an elastinous tissue, which is definitely me. My tissue is very permeable. I'm hypermobile. I'm super I don't tend to get stiff. I just don't I wake up in the morning, I'm not stiff because I have a different kind of tissue. And the default for this type of tissue is freeze, which is what I go towards. People with elastinous tissue tend to have a lower blood pressure, which I've always had a super low blood pressure. They're more sensitive. Hot yoga is intolerable to them. They can overstretch. And that is totally me. People who love hot yoga, I'm like, I don't know what you're talking about. I cannot do it. And it's so much based on the type of tissue that I have. I already talked about hypermobile joints. My digestion can be a little slower. And so again, knowing the different types of tissue we have, that also is perhaps a part of what our nervous system tendency is. And then again, once you know it, knowledge can be power. Again, you can't change it. You are going to always go towards fight. I am most likely always going to go towards freeze. But because we know that, we have the tools to kind of work with it and we can see it happen.
Right.
I'm super cold right now and I'm really spacey and I don't want to deal with anything. All right, I must be a little dysregulated. What can I do to bring myself back into more regulation?
Yeah. The other thing I want to say is that just how I think your nervous system gets dysregulated around 13 times a day or something, right?
8 to 20 is what I have in my notes. Yeah.
So this isn't something you're on Tuesday, I'm going to work on my nervous system, right? Every day I find myself every few hours, you're just that just kind of knocked me off And so thinking about it as a daily practice, I guess, is what I'm saying.
A lifestyle in many ways.
Yeah. That I don't want to live in that state all the time. It's my natural go-to when there's stress. And I know that. And sometimes it's helpful to me because stress can be helpful at times. But it's when it tips the balance of that, knowing that throughout the day, I will bring myself back into balance.
Yeah.
And there's a level of comfort in knowing that you have that, you have some power around that if you can take a few moments.
Yeah. All right. Well, we're going to put all kinds of resources in the show notes because this is a very deep and there's so much about this topic. We wanted to just touch the surface of it and give people things to think about. If you want to go deeper, we'll put resources. But more than anything, take a nice deep breath, feel your body, lean back a little bit, rock, hum, and talk to your friends. This is huge in terms of finding some regulation. So thanks for talking about this, friend Kate.
Thanks, Betsy.
Right. Thanks for joining us today. If you like this podcast, please subscribe, rate, and review. Come back and rewild with us again next week.